All right, guys. So here we are. Should be live momentarily. I am going to switch up my views. All right. So this is again our syllabus. Last week we covered our introduction to the 7 P's of object-oriented concept design. And then today we're going to get into the elements and principles of design. Okay. And I'm sorry, you guys can hear my son getting excited in the background. Hold on a second. Okay, sorry about that. Uh, oh, guys, so go to the YouTube link. I'll post it again here. And I will mute my mic here and I will turn off my camera. Okay. And I guess what I can do, I can probably add this link to Canvas immediately. I will do that now, just so that anyone who's maybe kind of showing up a little late will be able to join us. So I'm gonna go to Home, and we'll add. All right, and just make that visible. So you can click on this link as well, and that should bring you to this recording. But let us continue on. So last week we covered the 7 P's, which again is kind of like my way of if I really kind of need to break something down and I really need to understand how I want to approach creating an image. Sometimes I'll just doodle. I love just doodling, or sometimes I'll just jump in. I'll try to create something, just based on what someone's asked me to do. But if I really, really need to kind of get something done, I will break it down. I'll do the 7 P's. I'll make sure that I know specifically what question am I trying to answer, in the sense of who is this image for. So I go through each of my 7 P's. My purpose. What's my purpose? Right? What is my who is my protagonist, or what's my plot? What's the story that I'm trying to tell here? What are the proportions I'm going to use? What kind of pose do I want to have? What kind of personality would I want to kind of showcase with this character or this scene? What kind of personality do I want to evoke? And then what point of view, what perspective do I want to choose? And then finally, how am I going to present it? I find that if I go through each of those 7 things, and I'm like very deliberate about it, my chances of arriving at something that I'm happy with are much, much higher. And I think one of the simplest reasons for that is because I've started with the very first P, which is the purpose. I think once you know what your purpose is, once you know the question you're trying to answer, or the reason for the drawings being, you will it'll kind of guide all the other choices that you make. And that moment when you're like, oh, I don't know if this is good, or is this right, or because art can be so subjective. For me, having that kind of clarity helps a lot. So I can know, yes, this character is more appropriate, based on this initial idea versus this other character that I also like. So anyways, for me, that's helpful in terms of kind of finding that clarity. So we've gone through that. We'll continue to use those 7 P's throughout the semester, but today we're going to talk about the elements and principles of design. And prior to you guys and prior to last year, this is what I would have started with normally. This is like the foundation of all art for the most part. At least on if you're building a house, this is talking about how to lay bricks, how to kind of put up drywall, how to frame things out with wood 2x4s, where to put your nails, all that kind of stuff. That's basically just talking about the nuts and bolts of how to build a house, the elements, and then the principles is just kind of like best practices on how to assemble these different pieces. So this is kind of like the foundation of picture making from my perspective. So what we are going to do today will also be something we revisit over and over, not just this semester, but through our 4 years that I have you guys. And it's something that the better you get at it, the more conscious of it you are, the more interesting and kind of visually arresting your games can become, or any image that you make. You can really make sure the audience is kind of connecting it to it in the way that you want. All right, so that's what we're going to talk about today. We're talking about the elements and principles of design, creating characters and compositions using the elements and principles of design. So we'll recap some of what we did last week, but we'll add the new dimension of adding color or adding value and playing with that. All right. So guys, let's continue on here. I'm gonna get rid of my face here, and I'm gonna share this with you. I'll put it on the YouTube stream. I'll put it on both the YouTube stream and here. Okay, and so you guys can check out that link. And what this is this is basically just a Trello that I made to kind of help students and myself just to kind of be mindful of what the elements of design are, what the principles of design are, and then kind of going in further detail on each element of design. So each element of design has various properties. Okay, so for example, a line has a direction, and think about it. What are the properties of a line? It has a direction, it can be straight or curved, right? It can be long or it can be short, so its length, its weight. What I mean by that is how thick or thin that line is, and we've talked a little bit about that last week. When just making basic shapes out of lines, I suggested making the lines thin so that the line had less presence and the shape had more presence. But basically that is just kind of highlighting here, and I've color coded it. So blue is line. That line is an element of design, but it also has various properties. Okay, the properties become important because the properties are how we apply principles to them, right? We can only apply the principle of contrast to a line once we understand which property we want to work with. So I can have a contrast of direction, a linear direction contrast, or I can have a straight curve contrast, right, which we talked about last week. Or I can have a length contrast, so I can have a long line versus a short line. Or I can have a weight contrast, so I can have a thick line versus a thin line, right? And on and on and on. We can have a shaky, scratchy line versus a clean, precise line. We can have a wobbly line versus a kind of very mechanical, robotic-looking line. And so I have this image here, which I think helps to further kind of just clarify all of this. So these are different properties that you could think about with a line. And then this is just examples of how we can start using some principles with that. Okay. So we can have the principle of harmony. Okay, harmony is basically just that. Making things as harmonious and similar as possible, right? So when our picture is harmonious, we have a bunch of lines here, but they're all going in the same direction, right? They're all kind of like going horizontal. We don't have one diagonal line. We don't have one vertical line. Everything's going horizontal. We could say that there's some contrast here, even though it's harmonious. There's some contrast maybe in terms of line length. All these lines are not exactly the same length, right? Or even position or things like that. But for the most part, it's impossible to completely eradicate certain principles of design. You're not going to ever completely eradicate contrast, because without contrast, we wouldn't even see anything. Like, it'd just be a total black image, or a total white image, or a total orange, or we would have absolutely no change anywhere. Contrast is required in order to discern one thing relative to another thing. So we're automatically going to have some contrast. It's just a question of how much and how much emphasis do we put on it. Okay. So anyways, just different examples here. Harmonious line usage and contrasting line usage. So horizontal is contrasted against the vertical. Again, same thing. Harmonious usage of lines. This is just vertical. And then the contrasting element now is the horizontal. Okay. And here we have a different principle. This is a principle called dominance. So with the principle of dominance, here we have a bunch of lines, but they don't read necessarily as lines. They do, but they also read as a giant block, right? Because there's this overarching idea of a block, and these lines are being used within that block. Let me kind of give you another example. So just jump over to Photoshop here. I'm just going to go for a regular legal size paper, 8.5 by 11 at 300 dpi. So I'm just here in the print option. I'll go for a landscape orientation instead of a portrait orientation, and just go ahead and hit create. Okay. All right. And I'm going to make a new layer like so. So just hitting the plus here will give us a new layer. As I mentioned, you can also press Control, Shift, and N to make a new layer. It'll bring up the new layer dialog, and you hit OK, and you'll see you get a new layer there. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to get a marquee selection here of a box. You can also tap the M key, M as in marquee, to get a marquee selection like so. And then I'm going to go in with a paintbrush, change my color to black, and I can basically just draw several lines here. Inside this box, or inside this shape, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be a box. But what I'm trying to convey here and show is that I have a whole bunch of lines. So that's the element that I'm using. Okay, the element, the ingredient is line. I'm also using value, of course, because these lines are black, right? And they're on a white background. But when I drop that selection, you'll see that while I haven't drawn a box, but I have created a box. I've created a square indirectly, right? So using the element of line, I'm showing dominance here. So this is the dominant shape here is the square, right? So all these smaller lines, they're kind of being controlled by this bigger shape, right? So they fit into that shape. So that's one of the principles of design. So that's kind of one of the things that we can talk about. Here's another example. So here is a kind of a curved line made up a bunch of smaller lines. So there's kind of like this overarching theme, which is this dominant theme of this big curved line, but its ingredients, its elements consist of these smaller little short lines, right? Rhythm is basically having a repeating element, right, at regular intervals. Generally speaking, we want to break it up a little bit. We don't have to be totally even. You can. This is also rhythm, but rhythm works a little bit more nicely if we kind of break things up a little bit. Balance is basically, you can imagine a scale with the fulcrum in the middle, and the visual weight of the elements on one side, we want them to kind of match with the visual weight of elements on the other side. Okay, so these are a couple of different examples of balance. And then direction. This could also be dominance, but direction is basically like a suggestion or a feeling of movement through the piece. So these are principles of design, and we're going to have an opportunity to kind of do our own a little bit later today. Okay. All right, so hopefully everybody's with me so far. So we're going to look a little closer at each of these. And this is also a handy reminder, hopefully also for the 7 Ps. So our purpose, protagonist, our proportions, our pose, our personality, perspective, and presentation. I think we can safely say that the elements and principles of a design really fall within presentation. How do we want to display our work? Okay, we're going to plan things out, right, with these first 6 Ps, and then with our 7th P, we're going to kind of elaborate and present our idea to the world in a way that's consistent with our purpose. All right, so let's talk a little bit about each of the elements of design. Okay, so line, shape, value, color, texture, form, and space. Let's go through each one individually. Again, we'll do this in Photoshop, and you guys you can follow along. You can do this on paper, you can do this in Photoshop. It's totally up to you how you guys want to do it. So this stream is weird. It looks like for 1 second it'll be 90 people, and then next second it'll be 45. It's like fluctuating in terms of viewers. That's strange. Okay. All right. So here we have our blank canvas. I'm just going to go for my text tool here. So let's just go for our horizontal text tool. You can press T to also bring it up. And I'm just going to write out each of my elements of design. So please follow along. And we'll just write it, and then we'll make some examples of each. So first one will be line. Oh, and I'm drawing with white text on white background. And why can't I see that? Why can't I see the white text on the white background? Because it's using one of the principles of design, which is harmony. It's too harmonious. If I made this a light gray, we can almost see it, but not quite. Let's make it a little darker gray. Okay, so notice we can just barely see it. It's just barely perceptible. So we have a little bit of contrast, but this is kind of mostly harmonious. This light gray really kind of matches up well with the background, right? So it's kind of camouflaged. So we want to think of the principle of harmony as almost like camouflaging things, but that's just an aside. That's just kind of an interesting example. I'm just going to make this darker so that it can read a little bit better. Okay, so we have line. And we'll make another one. This will be shape. Excuse me. We'll make another one. And by the way I'm duplicating these is if you go into your move tool by pressing V, or if you hold down Control. If I hold down the Control key, it'll temporarily put me into my move tool. Okay, and while I'm in the move tool, if I press Alt or hold down Alt, you can actually duplicate a selection. So I can hold down Alt, and you'll see it allow me to duplicate that object, or that layer, I should say. And I could just drop this down here. Okay. Okay, so let's make a few more. So we have line, we're gonna have shape, we're gonna have value, we're gonna have color, we're gonna have texture, we're gonna have form. I'm gonna put an asterisk beside form. And last but not least, we're gonna have space. Form and space, I usually put an asterisk beside them just because they're kind of pseudo elements. Okay, so we have this. So if you guys can put together something similar, this can be on paper. This can be digital, like I've done. But we want to capture some examples of what each of these are as well. All right. And you know what? I'm just going to make this just a little smaller. Give it a title. Okay, so we could call these elements of design or elements of art. Okay. Let's just fix those up. And I can kind of get some interesting effects here. If I click on the this guy, this little clipboard with my text selected, and I'm in the text tool. If I click on this clipboard up top, it's going to bring up my excuse me, my font settings. So I can do things like add an underline or stroke through, or add subscript, etc. All that kind of stuff. Italic, bold, and on and on. Okay, or even can change the color from here. So let's make the color a little different. All right. So let's now draw in some examples. What I've done there, I just selected a multiple layers. I selected the first one, and I held shift, and I selected the last one. And then I pressed Control G to create a group, and it grouped all of those different elements. So I can also have it selected here, and I can press click on this, and it'll group everything as well. And we'll just call this text. Yeah, so you guys get the whole Creative Suite for free. There are instructions on how to download it. You just have to go into the Creative Cloud. So you have to go to software.ontariotechu.ca and then go to the instructions on how to download the Creative Cloud. And then all the Adobe tools will be available to you in there. All right, so we have this: line, shape, value, color, texture, form, and space. Let's start drawing out some examples of each. So I'm going to create a brand new layer here. All right, we'll just call this, I'll call this line. And I'll just go for a regular paintbrush tool. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And line is simply that. That's a line, right? This is a line. I can use lines for all different kinds of things. If I'm drawing a character, on paper. This is kind of how we're accustomed to making art. But why are we accustomed to making art this way? It's really based on the drawing utensils that we have at our disposal. We have pencils. Pencils, they make marks. What kind of marks do they make? They only make lines. So we learn to draw with lines. If the first thing anyone ever gave you was a paintbrush or a spray paint can or something like that, you're going to operate in a different way, But because all we have, or what we've been given, is a pencil, we're accustomed to creating characters with lines. We plan things out with lines. So if you're doing manga characters, you plan it out with lines. You kind of draw a circle with using a line. You draw like a jaw shape using some lines. You draw a center line using a line. You draw an eye line using some lines, and then you kind of continue fleshing it out. You have all these lines, and then you erase some of your lines, right? And you keep some of the lines that you want to be visible. But we use the line for planning, and so that's oftentimes what lines are for, right? And that's kind of how we think about line. Lines can be used for perspective, right? So when we're going to get to perspective in a week, we create a horizon line, right? We create a vanishing point, and then we create these vanishing lines that all go back to that vanishing point. Okay, but it's all using just lines. Okay, and then we say, let's make a house here, and let's use lines to describe it. Okay, so we're just kind of like our culture is we use lines a lot for almost everything, right? And oftentimes talented artists, they'll disguise their use of lines in their final picture, and they'll have it look like really beautifully painted or something, but more often than not, they started with lines, at some point to plan things out. So that's basically what we are doing. But lines can do a lot of things. They can just be a mark. You can have a picture that is made solely of lines, right? And you can be expressive with your line. You can have a thick to thin to thick line. You can have curved lines at some points, right? And straight lines at some points. You can have a sharp bend. You can have a firm bend, right? But not sharp, right? When they come to a point. You can have pointy parts. You can have rounded parts, right? It's unlimited what we can do with our lines, and if our lines get too thick, right, they start to look almost like shapes, right? Is it a line? Is it a shape? It becomes both or neither, so at what point is this a line, and at what point is it a shape? If I make it this, like this, is it a shape now, or is it still a line, or is it both, right? And if you're really being particular about it, every line is actually a shape. Like we can't represent a true line. Line, well, we can, but a line can be, say, a delineation between two different values or two different colors. So I could have this line here, and then on one side of that line and I'm just doing this on a new layer so I don't mess up what I had before, but on one side of that line I could have one color, and on the other side of the line I can have another color. So now you can't really see the line, but the line is implied. It's delineating two different colors or two different regions or two different shapes or whatever, right? And then, if you take it a step further, this then is a line too, isn't it? Right? This is a line. This whole blue shape is bounded by a line. These two colors are delineated by a line. And this red to the white is bounded also by a line, right? So let's not be kind of undersell the power of the simple line and what it's capable of doing. And so you can see here how that line was a plan. I used this line to plan out this more sophisticated design, right? Which is still simple, but it's a little bit more sophisticated than just this, right? Excuse me. So so that's kind of line in a nutshell, but it's really down to your creativity and how you want to work with it. So I can have all kinds of line. I could have a broken line, right? I could have a what did I do? I can have a zigzaggy line, right? I can have a kind of scribbly line. I can have a clean, smooth line, right? And an S line, as we talked about last week. I can have a C line, a C line. I can have a straight line. It's really unlimited, the amount of different things that we can do. And I can have a line that is in some places very dark and opaque, and then other places very transparent. And I'm just going to go into my settings here. I'm going to turn on my transfer settings. And I'm going to turn this off. If you want to see how I set up some cool brushes, by the way, there you can do I have any questions here? Okay. Oh, so what did I do? What did I do that you want to guys know, what you want to know about? Okay. I'm trying to make sure that I speak about what, maybe changing the brush settings. Oh, I pressed F5. Thanks. Yeah, I pressed F5 to toggle open your brush settings menu. Okay. In your brush settings, you have like a whole bunch of different parameters, different options. The first one being shape dynamics, and that simply describes the shape. We get a nice preview here. Thin pressure, or light pressure to heavy pressure to light pressure again. So I see here things like jitter size. I can make my brush stroke like a little more jittery, like so. Still a line, but totally different quality to that line. I'm going to set my jitter size back down to 0. The minimum diameter is basically at my lightest pen pressure on my stylus. How big will this be? What percentage of maximum size will this be? So at my lightest, if I set this to 70, no matter how light I press, it's going to be 70% of the width of my brush. And then when I push fully, it's going to go to that 100% thickness. Okay, so you can play with that. I had it set to 0, so that when I press light, I have like almost no line there. So I like this for drawing. Brush tip shape, we talked about this last week, but under brush tip shape, we can adjust the hardness. So I set my hardness to 100%. If we have our hardness lower, you'll see I have a fuzzy edge to my line, and I for this, I do not want that. Right? See that fuzzy edge that I have? There might be situations where that's preferable, but for me, I tend to dislike that for most things, especially for drawing. If I'm painting or blending different colors, then yes, that is good. Alright, so I set my hardness to 100%. My spacing here is at about 25. We talked about this last week. If I set my spacing too great, I'll get a bunch of disconnected dots. Okay, is this a line? I don't know. That's a good question. Is this still a line? It is. It's an implied line, right? It's a line made up of a series of dots. Some people consider dots or points to be elements of design as well. Elements of design as well. For me, it doesn't make my list of elements of design. But anyways, excuse me. So here's what we can do with lines. We could suggest perspective, right, by having overlapping forms. Okay, these are mountains or hills, kind of going back off in the distance, and our characters standing here. But so getting back to our brush, yeah, so I'm going to change this up. So I'm going to turn off my shape dynamics, turn on my transfer settings. Under transfer, I'm going to set my pen pressure for opacity and my pen pressure for flow. Okay, and I'm going to put both my flow and opacity, the minimum, I'm going to set them both to 0. Okay, so when I'm not pressing very hard, I have a very transparent brush stroke. But then the harder I press, it gets more opaque. Okay, so this is also like something I can do. I can have a line that is changes value, depending on how hard or soft I press. Okay, but these are all just like different examples of things that can be done with line. And we're really just kind of scratching the surface. If I turn my shape dynamics back on, I'll get a brush kind of like this. For various reasons, I do not like this kind of a brush where it gets thick to thin, drastically thick to thin, and also transparent to opaque. So I tend to kind of just have one or the other. So I'll usually turn off my transfer settings if I want to draw, and I'll just have the thick to thin shape dynamics on my brush. Okay, but this can be again used for all kinds of things. We can use line for something called thumbnails to plan out a composition. So we can have, say this is our canvas, we can plan out how we want to divide this space. Say this is some kind of foreground, and maybe there's a tree in here somewhere, right? And there's like a canopy of that tree, maybe some rocks. So if you think of paint by numbers, or if you think of those adult like coloring books, they'll have lots of different lines, and you can kind of go in and do what you want with it. So here we'll have some kind of water, and then maybe some kind of mountain range in behind, right? So right now, it's not kind of like super clear what's happening here, but this is like a plan. This is like a basic plan for something that's going to be a little bit more sophisticated once I decide to add color. Okay, once I start introducing more of the elements of design. Okay, so from here, let's kind of wrap with line. But what I want you guys to just explore, mess around, make some lines, make some marks, see what can be done. Get everything out of your system. Like just kind of explore freely. Just make marks. Think abstractly. Don't think, oh, I have to draw something that's recognizable. Just kind of make shapes, make marks, make heavy, angry lines, make thin, wispy, whispering lines. Try to think about the expressiveness of the line as well. Okay, so I find this very visually interesting, more so than like a character or something like that. I just find like that the quality of these lines, these strokes, like just to be very dynamic and interesting. So that's line. Okay, next is shape. Okay, so I said we're very kind of like accustomed to working with lines in our society, because almost all of our drawing utensils that we've been given from a young age are line making drawing utensils, right? Our pens, our pencils. Some of us have been given paintbrushes, but even a paintbrush makes a thick line, but it kind of makes a line. Unless we have a big paint roller, right? Where we're kind of like covering big swatches. Or if we have like a bucket of paint and we're splashing it on things, or we're doing hand painting or finger painting, like we did when we were kids. But sometimes what we will do, our teacher might give us a bunch of different pieces of colored paper and some scissors and say, cut out some shapes, and kind of work with shapes that way. So that's another thing we can do. We'll take a look at that. So let's look at some shapes here. So for this, you can go to your let's go to down here, see where this line is. If I click and hold on that, you'll see that we have different tools here: rectangle, ellipse, triangle, polygon, line tool, custom shape tool. So if we click on this, you can also press U on your keyboard, or Shift U. So Shift U to toggle through those different shapes. Shift U as in up. Okay. So I'm holding down Shift, and I'm just tapping U, and it's just cycling through these different shapes that I have. And be mindful, these shapes have different modes, so you can get to these different modes up top here. So I'm set to pixels, but I think by default it might be set to shape mode. If it's set to shape mode, it's going to basically make a new layer with that shape on it. And you'll see I have an option here to make these rectangular shapes. Okay, and I can combine shapes, make characters that way, right? Or plan things out. Oops. Okay, so we can kind of make like a cool robot or something like that. You know, we can kind of mess around with these shapes. I can kind of have a shape here, maybe have 2 legs. And just like we did last week where we had simple shapes and then we added eyes, nose, mouth. If I were to do the same thing here, can change the, whoops. Let's change that back to black. Let's add another new shape here, and then I'll change this shape to white or gray or whatever. And add another one. Right? Then all of a sudden I also have a character, right? It's just a different way to approach things. Okay, let me just share the link here for Adam. Okay, so yeah, so we can mess around simply with shapes, and these are kind of very rigid looking shapes. But remember last week we were talking about what if we had a shape that had a curved side to it and a straight side to it, and we kind of were mixing things up, like so we had straights and curves to kind of introduce some contrast. So we can absolutely do that with our shapes here too. So for now, let's go to our pen tool. So there's a pen tool here. You can also access it by pressing the P key as in pen, P as in pen. And with the pen tool, I can tap one left mouse tap and then one click and hold and drag will allow me to make a rounded part, and then let go to confirm that. And I can click and drag and hold again, right? And then maybe tap one more time, tap, and then go back to my first position. And then I've made my shape, like so. Up top left here, I've noticed I've set the path as well. Let's set that to shape. Let me just do that one more time. Okay, so now I have like an interesting shape that I can use as the basis for a design. The neat thing, because it is a shape, it's live, it's dynamic, I can always tweak it. So the way I'm tweaking this, I hold down the control key and I'll get this little white arrow, and then I can select any of these points, and once I've selected, I can move it around like so. Okay, I can select any of these Bezier handles and I can change them, manipulate them like so. And so these shapes are dynamic. So it's better to use a stylus, but feel free, if you don't have a stylus, you can absolutely use a the pen tool to make as kind of like as big a variety of shapes as you want, and have a lot of control over it. So we'll spend a little bit of time making shapes here, guys. I think using the pen tool is going to take a little bit of practice. But basically, again, select the pen tool. Make sure you're in shape mode up here. Okay, we can choose a fill color. So long as it's not the same color as the background. And then to start my shape, I can just left click. I can either left click or I can left click and drag. If I drag, as soon as I start dragging, you'll see I'm pulling out these Bezier handles. Okay, and the Bezier handles make it so that point will be curved. I'll have an influence on it from these Bezier handles to pull out the form. If I just tap, if I just click, then I get a point with no Bezier handles. Okay. And you can hover over an existing point and you'll see like you'll get a minus sign, and that means you can subtract that point. You can hover over a line with no point and you'll see a little plus, and that means you can add a new point. Okay, and then again you can hold down the control key to get this little white arrow to allow you to further manipulate that particular point. Okay, if you want to get rid of these Bezier handles, you can hold down the Alt key. The Alt key will give you this little upside down V. Okay, and you can click on the point and it'll clear out any kind of Bezier curves from that particular point. Okay. But it's fun to just kind of play around and see what you can come up with, what you can create. Because it is so dynamic, you can really kind of explore until you get a shape that you like. By the way, if you guys have questions and I'm missing it, feel free to turn your mic on in Google Meet. I still have it open. Turn your mic on in Google Meet and just mention it out loud. I'll be able to hear it. You know, anyone else who's in the Google Meet will be able to hear it. But yeah. Okay. All right. So this is shape, working with shapes. And shapes are basically made out of lines, right? So we can kind of use lines to plan our shapes. All right, so we can be very conscious of the boundaries of our shapes by kind of delineating with line to start. We can kind of plan things out that way. So I could go to any of these, kind of tap, 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 and then, you know, maybe go down here, go up here with a dragging this one, tap here, drag, tap, drag, tap, drag, tap. Oh, let's go back to the beginning here. And then we have this interesting shape that we can kind of move around, right? So this shape has a lot more complexity compared to some of these other shapes that I've created. So it's interesting. This one gives me like a kind of a clean, polished, sophisticated appearance. This one's like kind of ragged, shaggy, you know, a little bit more rough around the edges. I get a different vibe off this one. And subconsciously, these sharp points, they seem dangerous, right? This shape seems a little more threatening, a little bit more dangerous than this. This one seems maybe threatening here because it's got the point. It's got the point here, but it's balancing it out with like mostly round parts, right? So I I feel like, you know, this is a shape or a character or a creature or whatever, if I were to make it into one, that could hurt me if it wanted to, but it probably won't as long as I, you know, treat it nicely. Whereas this one will hurt me by accident, you know? If I get too close to it, it'll just automatically hurt me. So those sharp, jaggedy shapes, you know, they remind us of like things that have maybe stabbed us in the past, like a thorn or a sharp knife that we picked up the wrong way, or a pencil or whatever, right? So subconsciously there's this sense of, well, that could be a dangerous element, that could be a dangerous object. So we want to build that in and bake that into our designs, right? So if you are designing a character or a creature, try to make shapes that are pointy and sharp looking. Okay. So yeah, but this is just kind of working with shapes, and this is an absolutely other totally valid way to design, right? We can start with line, or we can start with shapes. And I've met plenty of people, well, I shouldn't say I've met, but I've seen people who struggle to draw and design with lines. But give them some shapes and they come up with some really, really cool ideas. Or, you know, give them some, like I said before, give them some construction paper and some scissors, and let them tweak those shapes and arrange them with each other, and they come up with some really, really interesting concepts. I'm just going to bring up my layers. So to bring up my layers, I'm pressing F7 here. And I can double click on any of these. Since these are shape layers, I can double click and then I can tweak the color or the value, like so. Okay. So what we can also do is we can actually start arranging with these shapes. So with the move tool, so I can hold down V or press V to get into my move tool. And then if I hold down Control while I'm in the move tool, it will switch, it'll auto select whatever, auto pick whatever is underneath my cursor. So you see how it's selecting different layers. So while I have the move tool active, if I hold down Control, you'll see there's this little dialog here for auto select. While I hold down Control, that will become checked on, and when that's checked on, I can click on things. It'll automatically select that layer and let me move it around. So the reason I'm showing this to you guys is, you know, I can go in here and I can play with these shapes, and I can rearrange things in different ways. Okay. And combine that, if I hold down the Alt key, I can duplicate a shape while I'm in the Move tool. So if I'm holding down Alt, I can duplicate that shape. Okay, and if I hold down Control, I can auto pick a layer, auto select a layer. And then one more thing, not to overload you guys with hotkeys, but I can press Control T, and it will transform the layer that I have selected, or whatever I have selected. So Control T. So hold down Control just to select this. Let's press Control T. Make it smaller. If I don't want to constrain the proportions, and I want to just move it on one axis, I can hold down the Shift key and I can slide in like so. Okay, hold down Alt, rotate, Control T. Okay, so that's an ear, and that's an ear. I like these things on his head. So we'll just hold down Alt here, duplicate a few of them. That can be some hair. Grab some of these eyes. Control T. So I'm just playing. And that's what I want you guys to do. Just play, experiment, see what works, see what doesn't work, and try to remember what works and what doesn't work for next time. All right. I'm going to do one more shape here. Actually, let me see if I can use one of these guys. I'll use this. So I'm going to hold down the Alt key just to duplicate this. I'll put that here. So why am I showing you this? Why am I kind of going so in depth with just shapes? Because I know I've gotten like a lot of messages from people saying, "Oh, I'm not an artist. I don't draw." I haven't even touched. I haven't even used my stylus, in the last 10 minutes or so. I'm just using my mouse. I'm just kind of like arranging shapes, and it's kind of like interesting, my results, right? Kind of Control T. I can rotate this, make him happy, make his mouth closer. I think sometimes what happens is there's like this finality to a drawing when you are working with lines. I feel like I've made a mark and I'm stuck with that mark forever, and it feels like it just feels like it's of heavy consequence. But I think when we can arrange shapes like we're doing here, it feels maybe you can more freely explore. You can try out ideas with a little bit more, with a little bit less pressure, right? So, anyways, that's that. I'm going to turn this into a nose because that's what I'm seeing. I'm going to go back to my pen tool. When I'm in my pen tool, then I can kind of select these points again, and I can kind of still play around with this. Okay, so this is kind of what I was seeing. This is some kind of nose, and I'll make it change its color. Double click on here to get the color, and I'll just make that like kind of a pinkish color. And he still needs a mouth, so we'll just repurpose this mouth here and just kind of put that in there. And just make it small. Okay, so this is a character now. For a game, I can give him a name. I can call him Bob the accountant or whatever, and from there, more ideas will start to flow. But yeah, so this is just kind of shapes. This is the power of shapes. This is what we can do with shapes. Everything we can do with line, we can pretty much do with shapes as well. It's just like a slightly different way of working, but visually it gives us a totally different effect, right? Less implied, more like kind of like this is it. Very graphic, very like look at me, stronger looking silhouettes, very kind of bold and kind of strong statements coming just from these simple shapes. Okay, so let's look at value. And we've started to kind of look at it a little bit here, but value is simply that. How light or dark is something, so we can have let me just grab all of these shapes. So the top shape all the way down to this one. Press Control G to group that into a group, and I'll just call this shapes. It's tough not being in person, I'll be honest, just because I can't tell if you guys are kind of connecting with what I'm saying here, but hopefully you are. If you do have questions, please let me know. Okay, but yeah, so we have that. So let's make a value now. Let's go here. I'll call this value. And what I'm going to do for this, I'm going to get my gradient tool. First, I'm going to make a box. So I'm going to go to my marquee selection tool. I'm going to tap the M, as in marquee, to grab that, like so. And I mean, I can make this as long as I want. Let's make it about this long. Excuse me. And value is simply light and dark, right? Just how light or dark is something. I'm going to use my gradient tool. And I'm going to fill this marquee selection. So by the way, I'll tell you guys a really nice hotkey. If you hold down the Alt key and then press backspace, it will take your foreground color. So you have a foreground color and a background color here in Photoshop. When we draw and paint, we're usually painting with our foreground color. I can click on this and change it, and basically what I've done there is I've just changed my foreground color. I can go back to black and white as my default colors by clicking on this little icon here. Okay, so if I set my foreground color to something like this, and I set my background color to something like that, and I'm like, oh man, I want it to be back to black and white, I can click on this icon, this little black and white thing here, and it'll go back to normal. I can also do that by pressing the X key. So tap the X key at any moment and it will change your colors back to just black and white. So if I tap X here, whoops, sorry, X is, my apologies, X is wrong. X inverts the colors, it flops them. So it makes your background color your foreground color and your foreground color your background color. So you can toggle that with the X key. To go to the default, you press the D key, D. Okay, tap D and it'll go to your default colors of just black in the foreground and white in the background. Alright, so I'm just gonna, with my foreground color, if I ever want to quickly fill with my foreground color, I can either, you know, I think we're all familiar with the paint bucket tool. So if I click and hold on this gradient, I'll get my paint bucket tool. You can also bring that up by pressing the G key. But if I fill with the paint bucket tool, it takes a moment to do it. It seems fast now, but it actually takes a little bit of time for that calculation to complete. But if I have a marquee selection and I know that I want to fill it with my foreground color, I can just hold down the Alt key, Alt, and then hold down and then press backspace, and it'll immediately fill with my foreground color. If I want to fill with my background color, I can hold down Control and then press backspace, and you can't tell that I've done it here, but I can fill with my background color, okay, in this case white. But if this background color were magenta and I press Control backspace, you see it will fill with that background color. And with this being black, to fill with the foreground color, again I'll hold down Alt and press backspace. Okay, cool. All right, so now we're gonna click and hold, and I'm gonna go back to the gradient tool. So I've clicked and held on the paint bucket, you know, go back to my gradient. I can also hold down Shift and then tap the G key to toggle through the different fill modes. In this case, I would just want the gradient tool. And up top left here, you'll see this dialog. I want to go for into my basics, and I just want this basic black to white gradient. So now with this marquee selection still active, I can click here on one side, hold down Shift to constrain the movement here on a horizontal axis, and then let go. And I'll have a nice gradient from dark to light. And so now with these gradients, with these colors, I can basically make, you know, any kind of design or character. So I can start making shapes. I can sketch them like this, right? So I can make a shape. I can choose a different value. I can make another shape here. Can fill part of this with another shape. Okay, and so just with black and white, I can make a simple sketch or a plan, you know, for something more sophisticated to happen later. And I can use these values as a basis for something I do in color later on. But I haven't even like really worked with line here. I'm simply just working with values alone, right? Values and shapes. I can't escape working with shapes, you know, and values here. I'm forced to do both simultaneously. You can't really have one with without the other. But for our purposes, you know, the elements of design, we consider them separately. Think of them as separate elements because we can control them differently. Any questions so far, guys, or is this all kind of making sense? Hopefully it's all clear. Okay. What some illustrators will do, they'll sketch something out like rough, loose, and then they'll use that as a guide, and they'll go in with their pen tool afterwards and then really tighten things up, make it super sharp and clean and precise using the pen tool, right? Making lines and edges more crisp and clean than they could do easily on their own. Someone said their colors don't work. If your colors don't work, it's probably because you have to go up here to image mode and make sure you're not on grayscale. You go into RGB color. Okay. All right, so value can be used in a whole bunch of different ways. We can also use value to suggest form and shape. So I can have like a spherical object here, right? And we can suggest form through light and dark. And we'll come back to this when we get to the principle of form, but yeah, we can have we can use value to describe form, and actually value is the only way people can really understand form. The way light plays off an object, the way the light interacts with a structure, is how our brains are designed to kind of decode the form of something. Okay, so we can see all kinds of cool colors and interesting things like that, but actually you can strip away all the color, and just the light and dark is what allows us to kind of understand structure and form. Okay. And this is bothering me. This is not well rendered, but anyways, so that's value, just light and dark, and that's kind of simply it. If we want to do some contrasty type stuff, we can have very dark colors juxtaposed right up against very bright light colors or light values. Shapes, all shapes, all shapes, all shapes, all just like different arrangements of things. Actually, let's make it interesting. Thin line, little kink, and then a little dot. Okay, but again, add high contrast, draw your attention to a certain spot. And if I really want the audience to look here, only look here, I could decrease the contrast here on the outside of my character, right? So how would I do that? I would just simply darken the background. So let's take this character, position him here. And if I want the audience to really just look here at this skull, I can, now I'm starting to kind of use the principles of design. So I'm using contrast here. And now I'm going to use some harmony, and you'll see what I mean in a second. I get my marquee selection tool. So hold down, tap the M key to get my box marquee. I'll just make this pretty big. And I want to get a dark value. So I try to make it just light enough so we can still make out the silhouette of the robot, but dark enough so that it kind of like it's closer in value to the black of the robot, and then the white of that skull kind of pops out. Okay. So we have absolute control just with value alone over a lot of like this extra detail, and I could kind of continue to go in here and say, say look, there's more detail, but it's not as kind of it's not nearly as prominent as the as that white of the skull. So I can have different like patches or different forms on this character, but so long as I'm managing the value, I'm consciously deliberately making that value a little lighter, just a little bit lighter than the gray, or so than the actual color of the rest of the robot. I can make it so that I control which has the biggest jump in value, which part of this design has the biggest jump in value. Okay. And it's just shapes, just shapes, just shapes. I think the key takeaway is like I still have a long ways to go. There's still like a lot of design choices that I make that I think aren't the greatest, but I know a lot of things that don't work. Let's put it that way. I've tried a lot of things, made a lot of really bad drawings, and I hope that I continue to make a lot of really bad drawings so I can keep learning what doesn't work and what does, right? And then I can kind of just do more of what works and get there faster because I've kind of got that experience, So anyways, that is that. I can add details and everything like that, but keep it subordinated to or kind of keep the emphasis on the thing that I want to emphasize. And I haven't even added color, but imagine if I added a bit of color to this. Something with no color, and then you add a little bit of color. Oh my goodness, like, watch. So if I add a splash of color, so right now this is the most prominent thing. This is the thing that we look at. And if I go full screen on this, we go here. By the way, something's bothering me that I have to turn off. And you guys might have this on yours too. If you go to View, Show, View, Show, there's this thing called the pixel grid. So when you zoom in close enough, it'll show you the little bounding box of each of those little kind of pixels. I really don't like it, so I like to turn that off. So I've simply turned that off there. But anyways, so say we have this composition. By the way, I'm tapping the F key on my keyboard to get rid of some of the UI clutter. I can hover towards the edge of my screen to bring some of these things back. Like so. And you'll see I have a ruler here. This is if I want to draw out guides and things like that, which we'll talk about next week when we do perspective. But for now I don't need it. I'm going to press Control R to toggle those rulers off. Control R to turn on and off your rulers. Just turn it off. So imagine this is our frame. This is all we can see, right? So just our robot character on a dark ground. Okay, so the thing that pops the most contrast-wise is that the white of that skull. But if I add some color, all of a sudden the color is now fighting for our attention. And we kind of want to look at that too. And there's kind of almost an even battle between this bright orange color and this. Just because this is so unique relative to everything else. This introduces different wavelengths of light, that we're not seeing elsewhere in isolation, on our canvas. So yeah, so I could kind of also do it like this. Right, or something like that. So there's a lot we could do. F6 will bring up our color palette. And I can play with this like so. But for our purposes right now, let's make this black again. And let's talk about color in more depth. So color has 3 components to it. So color has value as a component. So I can actually take this and duplicate it down here. Hold down the Shift key. And this is actually currently, because if I've done a marquee selection and I go into my move tool, right, I'm in my move tool, and then if I hold down the Alt key to duplicate, it won't actually make a new layer. It'll just make a duplicate of the thing, but it'll remain in the same layer. Okay, so that's what I've done here. So just Control Z to undo that. But if I want to take something that's on my same layer, so if I click on this, it's still on the same layer. If I want to take this and pop it out to a different layer, I can press Control, Shift, and J. Control, Shift, and J. It will pop this onto its own separate layer. Okay, whatever I had selected. Okay, so now it's separate from this previous layer. Okay, so let's put this in a group. Sorry, these two for our values. Select these, Control G to make a group. We'll just call this values. And we can turn that on and off like so. And this will be our color. So color has 3 components. Anybody want to guess what they are? The 3 components of color. Value is 1. Yes. Hue is 1. Saturation is another. Brightness is the 3rd. So brightness we can say value. Yeah. And those are the 3 pillars of color. So on my color wheel, when I go around the circle of my color wheel, that's giving me the hue. I'm changing the hue like so. Within this triangle, to the left side of the triangle, that's giving me desaturation. So this is like very grayed out colors to pastel colors to saturated bright colors. So this is a saturation. That's a component of color. How saturated or desaturated is this color, or how pure is that color, or how mixed is that color with other colors, right? So we have like these grays, which are rich and beautiful in their own way and nuanced, But then we also have these really bright, strong, pure colors that we have here as well. Generally speaking, we want a mix of both. I think the pure colors read more nicely when they're set against, some of these more grayer, harder to describe colors. I think we get a nicer ground for these more pure colors, these more saturated colors, let's say. So ultimately, we want to have a kind of a mix, but yeah. So the pillar that we've looked at so far, the value is just here. How high or low are we here? So as we go higher, we get lighter. As we go lower, we get darker and darker and darker. Okay. And you see the absolute brightest we can go is pure white. The absolute darkest we can go is pure black. And then here, the absolute most saturated we can go is over here, somewhere in the middle. All right. So those are the three dimensions of colors, and of course the next one is RGB here. So let me just make this bigger. I'm going to cheat a little bit here. You'll see how we have this hue slider up top, and then we have our saturation slider in the middle. By the way, to bring this up, you can tap F6 on your keyboard, F6 to bring up your color wheel. Change your color wheel mode. You can set it to hue cube, right? In this little sandwich window, hue cube, brightness cube, color wheel, RGB sliders, HSB sliders. For our purposes, we'll go with the color wheel. Helps to illustrate things. You'll notice the colors are cyclical. So we can start from red, move into orange, yellow, green, cyan, blue, indigo, violet, purple, and then back into red. Right? So we kind of can keep just going around and around here. And what I'm going to try to cheat a little bit. I'm just going to press Alt and then print screen, just to print my whatever is visible on this monitor, and then I'll Control V to paste that. Okay, so this is actually me taking a screenshot of Photoshop, and then I'm going to take this, do a marquee selection of this guy, our hue slider, and Control C to copy that, and then Control V here to paste. I'll press Control T to transform. I'll zoom in, zoom in, zoom in, and then hold down the Shift key and just drag this up so I get a thicker slice here. Okay, and I'll just move this down here. Let's just transform this a little bit more so it's more consistent to the size of what we had there. Okay, so this is our hue. This is our value at the bottom. And in the middle, we're going to have saturation. So saturation is something I want you guys to do on your own. Saturation can be blending from any color to gray, basically. A pure form of any color into gray. So what that would look like is, just make another rectangle here with our marquee tool. Okay, let's do this on a new layer. I'll just get gray here. Okay, press Alt backspace to just fill that layer, or that selection with that color. And then I'll just go over here to the saturated version and We can either do a gradient or I can paint this in. I'll just try to paint it in. I'm going to press F5 here to bring up my brush settings. Let's go for our color, or sorry, transfer settings. Turn that on. Turn off our shape dynamics. Under transfer settings, make sure that you have pen pressure set to opacity. Instead of being off, the opacity control here is set to pen pressure. And same thing for the flow control, we have that set to pen pressure as well. Okay. Then I suggest going into your brush tip shape, making your size of your brush pretty big. Okay, so it's pretty big like that. Okay, we'll have a very saturated color. Then we can kind of press hard on one side and then just lightly kind of feather this out. So kind of lightly kind of press and paint into the other side to kind of get this nice gradation going. All right. So this is our hue, our saturation, and our value. Merge them down into one layer. Just move this over a little bit. Let's label them. Make this a bit smaller. Hue. Just hold down, switch to the move tool, and then hold down the Alt key just to duplicate this out like I did before. Control. Hold down Control again with the Move tool to go into Auto Pick mode to automatically pick a different layer. I'll just select all of these. Make sure I'm in my my text tool, and with all of these layers selected, I can change all of the layers simultaneously. I'll just set the saturation here to 0, and that'll give me a gray color. So this will be hue, this will be saturation, and this one will be value. Okay. I'll select these three one more time. I'm just going to change the alignment mode to right alignment so that they can sit nicely against here. All right. So guys, we've gone for quite a while here. Let's take a short break. Let's take a break until 6:50, and then we'll continue. We'll go quickly through texture, form, and space, and then we'll start talking about what the principles of design are, and then how we can use these elements and principles of design to design characters. And again, it'll be a kind of a recap of what we did last class, but it will be a little bit, hopefully, more informed this time around. Okay? Guys, if you have questions while we're on break, I'm happy to answer them. So again, we have until about 6:50 until we start up again. You're going to hand something in. I will show you what it's going to be. You can include this, but what we're going to be doing is for activity this week. So this is going to be our activity this week. Choose an element. So you're going to choose an element, and then in each box you're going to demonstrate harmony. using that element. So say you choose color, for example. You're going to show, how can I show harmony using color? Or how can I show harmony using value? Okay? And you're going to make sure you use at least every one of these elements at least once. So variety. How can I show variety using color? How can I show variety using shape? Emphasis. How can I show emphasis using line? Or how can I show emphasis using color or value? And on and on and on. Okay, so basically that's what it is. It's going to be you applying the principles of design as you kind of come to understand them, and using the elements of design as your ingredients. Hong Zi, you have a question? Go ahead and you can say it in the Google Meet. It's going to be due on Friday. Friday, end of day. Yeah, Hong Zi. Oh, Hong Zi, you have a question?
Yes, like can you show me how to do that queue again?
Yes.
Thank you.
So, I cheated, by the way. I cheated. What I did, and I'll kind of go into the Google Meet, or so the YouTube stream, and I'll talk about it there. But so what I did is I took this image, I made it kind of big, my color palette, and then I printed screen. So I did a print screen operation. In this case, if I hold down the Alt key, because I have a dual monitor setup, if you hold down the Alt key when you press print screen, it'll only capture the monitor that you're working in. So if I hold down Alt and then print screen, I'll just make this small again. What that does, it copies this image here, this canvas, this whole screen shot to my clipboard, and then if I go in and I press Control V, or if I go to Edit, Paste, you'll see now we have this layer of that of my whole monitor, of my screen. So what I did was I took this color, this guy, I used my marquee selection tool up here, and I just dragged a little box around this, like so. And then I pressed Control C just to copy. I'll go here, Edit, copy that. Okay, I can hide that layer now. I don't need it anymore. And then I pressed Control V. Okay, and that just put this little strip of color on a layer that I brought in. And then I transformed this. Press Control T. And then I held down the Shift key and just kind of made it a little thicker. And then I pressed Enter, or you can hit this check mark up top. So that's basically what I did. Haha, no problem, no problem. So I'm throwing a lot of hotkeys at you guys. I'm saying like, oh, do this, do this, do this. Eventually, as you go through assignments, you're gonna inevitably make mistakes, and you're gonna like do things the hard way sometimes. But through the course of the semester, you'll get better and better and better. I'll repeat some of the hotkeys I use as we go. So I'll mention it again, not just the first time. I'll mention it again and again and again. But I'm not going to limit the approach we take. I'm going to show you how I use Photoshop. So I'm not going to kind of pull punches and be like, oh, let's use it in a kind of like a very simple way. No, there's things that you can do in Photoshop that really, really speed up your workflow. and allow you to have a lot of flexibility in terms of the way you work. So we'll progress, we'll elevate, and we'll kind of gradually kind of get more and more advanced as we go. But you guys will absolutely learn just by doing. You know. Is there a list of hotkeys? Yeah, I would say yes. If you go to Edit, Keyboard Shortcuts, you can go in here and you can kind of get all the hotkeys in here. And this is just kind of a nice thing for any application that you use. I think the issue probably more than anything is not knowing what you don't know. So you don't know what to look for. But where are our tools? So here are the shortcuts. You have shortcuts here for application menus, but we can go shortcuts for tools. And then you can see a list of the shortcuts for all the different tools here. So the pen tool, the shape tools, the move tool, but again, there's a logic to a lot of this, and we'll revisit and talk about these shortcuts over and over again. Yeah. So Michael Wilson, you have a question? Go ahead, Michael. And I see a question from Vanch as well. Vanch engineer. To answer you, you can just use that one template for everything. So you can mix and match. So you can basically use color here, line here, shape here, value here, texture here, form here, space here, color again, value again, line again. It's up to you. Here in this last one, you get to also choose your principal. So you choose not only the element, but you also can choose the principle that you want to demonstrate. Michael, you can use paper, yes, but you still have to show color somehow. Okay, so you still have to find a way to show color and value. Okay. And then to way how I did not really blend. I just kind of like painted lightly one color over top of the other color. I'll show you guys in future how to blend. Trust me, we'll get to that. But for now, it's not something you really have to worry about that much. But I can try to show you again. Okay. All right, guys, so we're past our startup time, so I'm going to turn off my mic here in Google Meet again. All right, and so let's get started back. Just delete some of this stuff. Excuse me, that I don't need. So we had a question, and I'll quickly try to cover it, about blending. What I did, let's say I have one color. All I had was like one color. Let's say I have this. That's gray. I'm going to press Alt, Backspace. Again, Alt, Backspace to fill with your foreground color. I'm going to leave that selection there. And by the way, I apologize, guys. I never told you how to drop a selection. So once we have a marquee selection, I guess you can just left click somewhere, just tap, and it drops the selection. But the proper way to do it is to press Control D. or you can go to select, deselect, and you can just see it says Control D there. Okay, so you can also just Control D. But yeah, so I have this selection, Alt backspace to fill, choose a color, any color. Okay, and then I need a brush that I can blend with, or not blend with, but kind of work nicely with. So I'll press F5 here. Make sure I'm on my brush tool. And transfer settings, set to pen pressure and pen pressure. Brush tip shape, I need to set the hardness all the way down to 0. See how smooth that looks? Spacing at about 25% is good as well. Also, if you go to our class, if you go down to resources, I have this Photoshop tips. And if you go to a buttery smooth blending brush, I have the instructions on how to create a really good brush for blending. Okay, so these are all the settings that I use. Don't feel like you need to do it now. There will be an opportunity outside of class to look at this, but that's what I like to use. If I really want to get a really clean, beautiful, like feathery, smooth transition, that's what I use. And then if I'm doing like kind of blocking out shapes and things like that, these are the settings I use for digital painting. But again, we're not getting into that just yet, so you don't have to worry about it yet. But if you did want to kind of explore this outside of class, that's what you can look at. All right, but here, back here, so I have this. I've set my transfer settings on, turned off my shape dynamics, and then I have my hardness and my brush tip shape set to 0. My spacing set to about 25. And so now if I paint, I get this, but if I paint with a really big brush, look how big my brush is relative to where I'm painting, right? And then if I just paint smoothly or lightly, see how easily I can kind of get this this nice transition. And then I take it one step further. If I hold down the Alt key, I can sample colors off my canvas, right? So I can sample this color, and then I can kind of continue to paint some more with that other color. So you can kind of get these really nice, clean transitions. All right. And then I can go back down with a smaller brush and, kind of continue to flesh that out. Okay. But the key, more often than not, is trying to use as big of a brush as you possibly can. All right. So let's get rid of this. So texture. Let's talk about texture. What is texture? Texture is simply like kind of value, mainly. It's just like high frequency value transitions. I can kind of look at some of these textured brushes that I have here. Let's make a new layer. Right, and we can kind of build it up, and kind of suggest or create a simple texture. I think the best way to describe texture, at least for me, is when you look at something, you can kind of get a sense of what it might feel like. You can think about it, and oh, that would feel cracked and rough, or that would be smooth and soft, or that would be sharp and pointy, or this would be very feel like a fabric, or like jeans or something like that, or wool. So texture is simply like using high frequency changes in value to suggest added detail, or to suggest a certain feeling, a certain sensation, a tactile sensation. So I'm going to go to angle jitter. I'm going to turn on my angle jitter here. I've checked on shape dynamics. I'm going to set my minimum diameter up a little higher. Transfers on. For brush tip shape, you'll see I'm not using my round brushes anymore. I'm using one of these kinds of brushes. And I can kind of go in here and suggest, you know, a rougher kind of like texture. And there's lots of kind of cool brushes that we can use in Photoshop. So I have brush settings here, but if I click here where it says brushes up top here, then I get a second dialog where we have all these extra brushes that we can use. I've made a whole bunch myself, which I can share with you guys. But here's like an example of a textured brush, you know, where I can add extra kind of form detail, or you know, so I can paint. I'm still painting, but each stroke has like it's packed with a little bit more information. So my drawing or my painting or whatever it is looks like that much more detailed than if I were to just use flat colors and shapes. So that's kind of what texture is, and that's what it allows us to do. So how would we contrast texture? We could have a rough texture contrasted against a smooth texture, for example. I'll just go back to brushes. So again, just look at a few other textured brushes that I have here. Okay, so it's a way, if you use Procreate, and for those of you who are on iPads, Procreate is like, that's like one of its claims to fame, I think, is like the cool textured brushes that it comes with, and just how it makes all your drawings just look that much more like sophisticated, you know, because you're using all this extra noise and there's this randomness and extra variety that comes from that. So that's kind of what texture is, just making sure that you suggest kind of a sensation, a tactile sensation, you know, of how things will look. Just breaking things up on a more micro level in terms of texture, or sorry, in terms of values, right? So you don't have just a flat, even value, but you can in some places. Like you can deliberately go for like, you know, more of a regular, smooth looking texture. But you kind of want to maybe contrast that against something else, or you're doing it consciously or deliberately, you know, to mix things up. So what I'm doing here, because you see how I'm getting this smooth kind of transition, what I can do is there's a hotkey to change the hardness of my brush. And some of you will know that you can use the square brackets to change the brush size, so you can make your brush bigger and smaller using the square brackets on your keyboard. You can see how it's changing my size of my brush. Right, when I press the left square bracket, my brush gets smaller. When I press the right square bracket, my brush gets bigger. But if I hold down Shift and use the right and left square bracket, watch what happens to my hardness. So you'll see it actually adjusts my hardness. So I can hold down Shift and press the right square bracket, and it'll make my brush shape harder. Right? By harder, it has a sharper edge. So I can get these sharp transitions. Right? But then by the same token, I can hold down Shift and use the left square bracket, and it'll make my hardness softer, right? So now I have if I make my brush bigger, you see it has a fuzzy edge, right? So now I can I hold down the Alt key, I select one of these transitional values, and then I use a big brush and I paint back over top of these other forms. And that gives me that it will give me that kind of smoother transition. Then I'll kind of select this here, make my brush small again, right? Just using regular square brackets, and then hold down the shift key and the right square bracket to make my hardness back to 100%. And then I can kind of redefine this this form here. Okay, and then if I want to get back to black and white, if you remember, there's a hotkey for that too. You can either tap this here black and white icon, or I can press the D key to get back to black and white. Sometimes I want to go in with black just to kind of cut in with you know, a very definite kind of drawn looking shape. Okay, and then I can press X to flip the back color and the front color to get white, and I can just pick out these highlights a little bit more to get that kind of form. So now I have very smooth, and I have kind of like contrasted against more rough. And if I want to have this smooth part and I want to break it up some more, I can use one of my rougher brushes, like say this one or this one. I'll select this darker color. I can paint a little bit into my light to suggest, you know, that there's some kind of erosion, or there's something kind of going on with this form. So it's kind of smooth, but maybe it's broken up a little bit with some little bit of texture. Okay, and that just adds more visual interest to my compositions. Okay. All right, cool. So that's texture. Now form. Form we've kind of talked about. Form, we can use value to convey form, but we don't just have to rely on value to convey form. And I think the first way we're going to really start looking at form this term is through linear structure, something called linear structure. So, by the way, these general brushes should just be available to you guys. So you can actually just go into these general brushes. So F6 to bring up your, or F5 to bring up your brush settings. And then if you hit this brushes, it'll bring up all your kind of brush presets. This is a great brush for just drawing. I think this is the default brush you start with in Photoshop. I don't know why that's default. I dislike this brush personally. This is a great brush for drawing. This is a good brush for painting, digital painting, and these are pretty good brushes for blending. Okay, soft round. These two, I would use this for kind of more doing like this kind of stuff, right? And this for blending things around. Yeah, so let's go back to a regular drawing brush here. Talk about form. So form is basically, how do we make something look like it's structural? How do we make it look three-dimensional? We've talked about shapes, right? We've talked about using line to make shapes. We've talked about using the pen tool to make shapes. Okay, so we've talked about both of those, but what we want to think about is how can we really make it look like a form. This looks flat. All of these look flat. They don't look three-dimensional. They don't look like they have structure. So we have linear structure, where we can basically just trace the surface of an object. So let's say this is now a peanut. Right, and we can draw dot dot dot. We can draw the backside as well. We can draw a center line, you know, or a line like so. This is what the anime books will kind of character creation in anime, or if you look at how to draw Disney characters, you know, or how to draw one of those how to draw 50 animal kind of books. They'll start with like a basic structure. They'll say start with, you know, this basic form for the dog's torso. Right? And it's kind of a three-dimensional structure. Right? But really, what is this? We've already looked at it. It's a shape. It's a shape. It's a silhouette. But then we're adding form to it. We're cutting into it. We're making it look like it's actually three-dimensional now. We draw through it. Okay? Here we can start with this. We can extrude it out so we can kind of make it like that. Like there's all different methods that we can use. It's always good to draw through. So draw through to the back side. Try to consider what that might look like. Okay? And kind of suggest that perspective, that form, that structure. Okay? But even for these guys, we can do the same thing. We can suggest structure to this, right? You can say that maybe here it's flatter, but then it starts to turn and curve, and then here it gets even rounder and even rounder. And this kind of dips up and then comes down like so, you know? And let's kind of find the backside, da-da-da-da-da, right? Kind of dips in. Like that. And like that. Right? And if we're to draw through here, we might get something like this. Okay? So that's kind of going with linear structure. So we can use linear structure to describe shapes and forms. Right? And that's simply just kind of going in and drawing what's called cross contour lines. These cross contour lines over top of our structure to suggest some kind of form to it. Okay? And the structure, as important as the structure is, if the shape is not great, if the shape is not beautiful and like appealing, and if I haven't considered the silhouette, right, and I don't like if I'm not happy with that kind of silhouette, the flat graphic shape of it, you know, even adding structure to it won't help. So it'll help a little bit, but I think 90% of the battle is kind of won if you have a strong, appealing shape. So if I were to turn this into a structural character, I think it would look more visually interesting than if I had a less interesting kind of design, right? And so that's what I'm looking at. But it's a choice. There's no right or wrong here. This could be anything. You could decide. You get to decide what that structure is going to look like. So it's an arbitrary choice. It's your choice, but you want to make a choice that reads nicely. Okay, so there's no right or wrong here. It's just kind of what you decide. Okay, but that's what form is. Okay, and of course form can also be told through value. So we can take this same shape, we'll duplicate it. And I'll show you guys how what I'm about to do, and I'll show you how to do it again later. But basically what I can have is a shape here. Okay, and I can create, because it's a shape, I can't draw or paint directly onto it, but I can make what's called a clipping mask layer. So I can make another layer above it. Okay, so I just click another layer above it, and I'm going to hold down the Alt key right in between these two layers. So this new layer I created above this shape, right, which is this layer, and I'm going to hold down the Alt key in between these layers until I get this icon of an arrow pointing down to the bottom layer. Okay, and I'll click on that, and now you'll see we'll get this little arrow. So I have to again hold the Alt key. Whoops, hold the Alt key. I can just keep clicking to toggle that on and off. But what I'm creating is what's called a clipping mask layer. And so basically what I'm doing is this layer on top is only going to influence the pixels below it. Okay, so let's turn it off for a second. If I paint like this, right, so I'm just painting, but then I turn on that clipping mask layer, so I hold down the Alt key in between these two layers, you'll see that it's going to clip out all of the pixels that were beyond the border of this shape. Okay, and if I turn it off, they're back. Right? If I move this layer by changing to my move tool, I can move this layer, but it'll only ever reveal itself over top of the pixels of the layer below it. Okay? So, again, I'm just going to delete. I don't want all this stuff on it, but I do want this clipping mask layer. So what I'm going to do, go back into my brush settings, make sure I'm on my brush tool, make sure I'm on that clipping mask layer, go into my brushes, get a nice blending brush like this one, make sure it's all set up nicely, go to the brush tip shape, 25%, it's all good. Okay, and then I'll just select a darker color, black is fine. Make a very, very big brush. Pretend the light source is coming from the top left here, and I'll just paint lightly, very, very lightly onto this form to suggest structure. Okay, and I can select white here as well and just paint a little bit with white on top. And now I have like this nice kind of a three-dimensional looking object. Right, so this is also me suggesting form. Okay, this time simply with value, not using not using linear structure. Right, it's just kind of using values alone. Right, and there's something called reflected textures that or reflected light that kind of goes past, bounces off something, and kind of lights up the far side. So I'm just putting these guys in, and if I really wanted to take it home and carry it home, I could add like some kind of a shadow shape. Oh. So I kind of got a little quick and a little lazy here with my shadow shape, but you get the idea. Okay, and then I could go in here and I could just soften out some of that shadow shape, but basically the idea is here is I'm now suggesting structure, I'm suggesting form. Started with a shape, but I made it look three-dimensional simply with value. Okay, simply with value. Okay, and then of course I could add in more dimensions. I could add saturation and hue to this as well. But you know, that's kind of something we'll talk about on a different day. And then finally, space. Space is basically us being able to suggest. Let's go for a nicer brush here. So we can have space. Space can be a lot of different things. It can be something called negative space, so the space between objects. So if this is an eye, for example, the negative space would be the space all in here, right? And the arrangement of these things actually makes a difference. If I kind of have this right there, the negative space reads differently than if I have it here, right? Or if I have it here. Every kind of design choice has a different implication. And this is something you can't fully kind of plan out, but you know, you can maybe try different positions and slide things around. You can select this just move it around and see where it looks the best. But this is an arrangement thing. This is a space thing. Playing with a negative space, what does that look like, and how does it look the best, and why, right? And then the other thing is with space, so we can have this interior negative space, but we can also have exterior negative space. So I can have this object, then I can have this other object around it, and then maybe some other object in between those. Sorry about that, guys. In between those. So it's just like, how are you managing or controlling the spacing between different elements in your composition? And then the other way we can have space like suggesting depth and perspective. One of the easiest ways to do that is to have like an object here overlapping another object. Okay, and we can have a horizon line or back line or something. But just by virtue of having one object overlap another object, it gives us this sense of like depth and space. You can imagine that we could walk in between these two forms and come out the other side, right? So that's kind of what space means, at least to me. And then to further kind of set things in space or in place here, you could add just like a shadow shape to say that these guys are sitting on the ground somewhere. Okay, so that's the elements of design. And we didn't really get into all the principles of design as of yet, but let's quickly cover them, and then it'll be up to you guys to kind of go in and start exploring them further. I expect you guys to do further research and kind of find your own resources and materials that explain the principles of design. I actually anticipate that there'll probably be different explanations than mine. Like I said, there's no great consensus on the elements or even the principles of design. There's some that pretty much everyone lists, like value, shape, color, line, but form, space, these ones kind of become they're on some people's list but not others. And then there's other things like, if you get into graphic design, they're going to talk about typography, so like text, and they're going to talk about text, and that's going to be one of their elements, and rightfully so. But for our purposes, that's not something we're going to really even discuss. So anyways, elements of design. Hopefully it's clear. These are the core basic building blocks of any picture. I challenge you guys to look up any picture, photograph, illustration, or otherwise, and try to discern where the shapes are, where the lines are, where the values are being used, or how the values are being used, how the color is being used, where the forms are, where the space is. You should be able to reduce any picture to its constituent elements. And recognize and understand, okay, I'm able to demystify the complexity of this image. That's the hope. That's the hope. Let's look at one image and just kind of, and I always wish we had more time, but here's a great image. So what do we have here? We have a very harmonious, beautiful picture. Harmonious in terms of a lot of green, but then we have some value contrast, right? We have some value contrast. We have light against dark, dark against light, right? But green, darker green, lighter green, orangish green, yellowish green, darker green, harmonious. So it's got some variety, but it's mostly harmonious. But then we have some value and color contrast here. So value, this part's way lighter. And then we have color contrast. This part is way yellower than everything around it. Not only that, it's unique in that this is the most yellow part of our whole composition. It's been saved. That color has been saved for here. Even the reds and everything, it's all kind of been saved for here. This blue as well. So we have a concentration of detail, right? All in here. We have unique colors, right? So we have color contrast. We also have really strong value contrast. How? We have dark, 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 really dark, and then really light. Really dark right up against really light. So we don't have a gradation. Here we have really light, gradually getting darker, gradually getting darker, gradually getting darker. And then it gets dark, but it's not a super abrupt transition like we have here. Like we're very bright against very dark. So this has been expertly managed so that, you know, the audience's eyes will immediately go here. We actually also have a little bit of yellow on this plane. So you can take like a little bit of yellow. So it's not so unique. It does show up somewhere else, but it's very hidden. But it gives us a sense of like intent. It doesn't feel accidental. It feels like a very well composed picture. And then what else? We have some texture going here, right? So playing with texture, suggesting like broken or rocky debris. So we can definitely get a sense of that. Whereas over here, the texture is a little bit more washed out, a little bit more suggestive. Yeah, and we also have like harmony in terms of like the linear motif. There's like very vertical feeling to this whole picture. Vertical line, vertical line, vertical line, vertical line, vertical line everywhere, right? This is contrasting against that, and it's also value contrast as well. And there's principles of design at play here. Movement, right? So movement. We feel the movement of these objects as they kind of flow through here. But the primary principles that we see are contrast and harmony. And more often than not, you're going to see those two. Harmony makes pictures look cohesive and beautiful. Contrast adds excitement. So harmony makes it look cohesive and beautiful. So all of this is very beautiful and cohesive. Subtract this plane and subtract these planes. But if we were just to look at this part, right? This is all very beautiful greens and like subtle shifts in hue. Very nice to look at. But then we have this boom, excitement of this contrasty part. Something's happening. Lots of detail, lots of contrast in a very condensed space. Our eye automatically wants to go here. Okay. We can look at some other examples. Harmony, lots of harmony everywhere. Grays, 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 grays. Everything's gray. Very little saturation. This looks fairly saturated, but it's actually fairly not. It's fairly gray, I should say. So even though there's like a lot of slightly different hue changes here, so there's like a lot of variety, which is the principle of design. In terms of these hues, we also have a lot of harmony. So these changes, these differences are not big changes. They're not big. There's a big change from this to this, and this to this, and this to this. But within these bigger shapes, there's very subtle, smaller, harmonious changes. So the big composition reads as this big shape, 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 right? Broken up with these other smaller passages. And then we have lots of detail and lots of contrast in one small area, in the character's face and hand. Generally speaking, hands, faces on characters are going to have the most detail, the most contrast. Those are the things that we're generally going to look at the most. We have a lot of form and detail in the cape and the arm and the sword and all this stuff, but the value ranges and the color changes are very subtle, to the point where we don't linger there. We notice it, and we say, okay, it's detailed, but I don't need to look at it. So it's kind of de-emphasized. Okay, so the artist is basically saying, do not worry about this. It's there, but don't linger. Don't pay attention to that. Pay attention to this. Okay, and they do that by harmonizing most of the picture and then adding some contrast here. This bright, glowing blade, the light on the face, the hand, right? Those are the main things that we want to look at. Okay. And you can look at just about any picture. Harmony. Where's the harmony? This light card, this like thing in the background compared to this light ground, right? Blues everywhere. This almost reads as like one big shape, right? Broken up with a little bit here. But value-wise, if you squint, the color is different, but the value is similar. So this color is different from this color, but the value is similar. So that there's the values are harmonious, right? We have value change here. And then we have a little bit of value and detail in the face. We see this. This is kind of something that this draws our attention. This tail draws our attention. The face draws our attention. And so do the feet to some extent as well. Okay? Lots of flowiness. Look at the C curve here. C curve, straight line. S curve, C curve, C curve, S curve, straight line, straight line, straight line, straight line, straight line. All right? So very deliberate use of simplified lines in the silhouette of these shapes to try to make it look a little bit more visually appealing. S curve here from the knee down to the foot, right? C curve, right? Nice C curve here. Nice S curve right going through here. Okay, so a lot of flowiness, a lot of rhythm, going through this design to really give a strong sense of movement throughout. Okay. Let's take a look at this. This is a 3D image. Harmony, blue, greenish hair, right? These arms pop. They're pink and they're brighter, right? So there's contrast there. I would say this is a really kind of cool render. Maybe the design of it is not quite as strong as some of those other pictures we looked at. There's not as much of a, there's not as much cohesion here, but really excellent details. Definitely you get the sense of the texture of this shirt. This shirt feels like fabric. This feels like some cybernetic cabling or something like that. This feels like it'd be plastic or metal. Definitely get the sense of that hair, skin texture, etc. Texture, you can see the texture, you can see the harmony, you can see where the contrast is. Again, maybe not the greatest kind of clarity to this design, but these are really interesting. Great use of texture, and I think these are 3D. I think this artist used 3D as a starting point for his 2D work. Really bizarre, crazy stuff. Interesting. You'll find, more often than not, environment artists are the best at organizing their elements and principles of design. Just because when drawing from nature, there's so much complexity there, you have to find a way to just make sense of it and kind of reduce. Change all those like micro hue shifts into like one simpler shape or form and use a texture to describe it, But this all reads as one shape to me. This guy, very small, but dark, very kind of strategically placed on a ground that is lighter. If this ground he was standing against was as dark as he is, we wouldn't see him. It would break the composition. But by virtue of the fact that, he's standing on this ground and there is a lot of texture here, but the value change and the color change is so subtle that we can't really pick it out. We have to almost imagine it. We know it's there, but it's so harmonious that it kind of just reads as that one shape on one level, but then with this kind of extra layer of complexity that we can't quite put our finger on. And then we have this this character that's just standing there, right? And he's standing against this much lighter ground. And then we have these really cool, interesting shapes here. Straight lines, curved lines, straight, or S, straight, C, straight, right? S, C, straight. Not necessarily deliberate, but you can see the visual value of having these simplified silhouette shapes. And there is a little bit of a breakup in that. It's not perfectly a curved line. There's a little bit of a divot here and a little bit of a kind of a crack here, but it's so subtle, that it still reads as like a straight line. We can just kind of break it up like with a little bit of noise, and it just adds that sense of like, this is not super pre-planned, but man, this looks really, really nice. So anyways, there we go. This is a sketch. Wow, great. So started with that super simple composition, right? Straight, da 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 da. This guy, dark against light, and that's how it starts. And then you kind of go in and he's got a time lapse too. I'll get into trouble if I play the time lapse because we're on YouTube, but I'll share the link here, guys. Check this out. So yeah, I hopefully my goal here is to demystify to some degree like what's going on in like these really awesome pictures that we see. Like, this is great, all this detail. Wow, look at that. This is cool. But what is he really doing? This is all red. This is a giant red shape. Giant red shape. Giant red shape. Giant red shape. Dark corner, right? Dark red corner, but all harmonious. Mostly harmonious, right? Mostly harmonious, but with a splash of contrast, right? So a lighter value, different color. Contrasting color, contrasting value, but we've reserved the brightest or the biggest delta, that biggest change from hue contrast and value contrast for the area that we're supposed to look at. And we also have rhythm, right? Or pattern, da, 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 da. We have this kind of tempo going through our piece with these repeating diamond elements, right? So yeah, and we have all this variety, all this visual interest, but it is subordinated. It's kind of the dominant theme here is red, right? So there's a lot of interesting things happening, man, and it's just a matter of, you can look at it and kind of reduce it and understand it and appreciate it. Doesn't make it any easier to do. Like, I look at this, I'm like, holy smokes, like I wish I could do that. And maybe I could, but coming up with the idea, I could execute it, but coming up with the idea and thinking of like these little trees and all that kind of stuff, that's unique to this artist. These are those unique flourishes that make it special. So it's really just about kind of, sorry guys, having fun with it and exploring, practicing, seeing what happens. I'll do a couple of examples here for you guys, and then I'll leave the rest for you guys to excuse me. Man, this phone, it's like a telemarketer or something. So someone said, I'd love to hear what you have to say about that gun. It came out yesterday, design-wise, of course. What gun? What gun is that? The gun to the... Haha, I do. Yes, I do. Alright, so... But that's absolutely probably what it is, you're right. So... These are great. I mean, it's just great to look at. Very harmonious in terms of colors. These are 3D sculptures, but just cool stuff to look at regardless. Looking at 3D sculpture, think about form. Think about silhouette. Look for those C curves. They're still going to be there. They're not always going to be there, but if you're looking at a really good design, more often than not, they're going to have like nice C curves, S curves in the silhouette. Look at any Disney character, Disney animated character, and you'll see like it's like a master class on C curves, S curves in the silhouette. It's just like spacing, negative space between eyes, the eyes to the nose to the mouth, the mouth to the cheeks to the chin. Everything is just in that right spot, and it just kind of all fits together like a perfect Lego puzzle. All right, so let's look at a couple of examples ourselves. let us go to our class. So we have our elements and principles of design. So guys, I'll share this on for our lecture 2. I'll just grab this link and I'll make sure that this is in our lecture 2. Okay, and then the other thing we'll do is let's go into our discussions and in class activity number 2. Just download this. So I'll save image as, or you know what? I'll copy image. I'll just go into Photoshop and I will file import, or sorry, file new, and it'll pull from the clipboard. I'll just go ahead and hit create and Control V and just bring that in. And so what we can do is we can take a look at this. So if we were going to look at harmonious lines or harmonious color, what would that look like? So I'll just make a new layer here. I'll make a little marquee selection around this box, like so. I'll give you guys another tip. I know I'm overloading you with hotkeys, but you can press Control H, and actually I can do it, or one of you guys can do it. When I say a hotkey, you guys, since we're on YouTube, if somebody puts a just writes it down, Control plus H equals hide selection. So someone can do that. I can do it, but basically Control H will hide our selection. So I have this marquee selection. If I press Control H, it's still there. I just can't see it. Okay. If I want to reveal it, I can press Control H again. Okay, to reveal it. Okay. Sometimes you might forget that it's there, but yeah. So we can do here. We'll do harmony with color. Harmonious colors. This for me is the most fun. It's fun, and I think you guys will find it fun too. So harmonious colors would look something like, choose any color. Let's bring up our color palette and then make subtle, very subtle kind of shifts, variations in that color. You know, I'm going to go for a more painty type of brush. Okay, and just make subtle shifts in hue. Right, you can make subtle shifts in hue. You can make subtle shifts in value and saturation. But again, you want it to remain harmonious. You can kind of play with how far you can push it. Right? But you want it to remain harmonious. Okay, I'm even trying to go with like a motif, like a directional motif. I'm not, worried about line or anything like that, but why not reinforce the harmony of this piece? Okay, and so that's basically what that is, and just play with it, have fun with it. You can kind of just paint freely. Don't have to make anything representational. Just have fun experimenting with the raw elements of art, and seeing kind of like how they manifest themselves, in different ways. And eventually you might see something. I might say of something, oh, this could be some kind of cliff or something, or maybe you see something that it could become, right? But that doesn't ever have to happen. It can remain totally abstract. These don't have to be anything other than abstractions. Okay. So that's basically it. Harmony. I've drawn Jupiter. This is a harmonious looking scene. So I do have some changes, some differences, but nothing so drastic that it feels like I'm breaking that harmony, right? And then variety. Let's say I were doing variety with color. Also, by the way, if you guys could just make a note of whatever element you're using. So let's say harmony plus color here, right? Let's do variety plus, let's do color again. Well, let's choose something new. Let's do variety plus shape. Okay, so again, we'll just make a marquee selection here. I'll press Control H to hide it. And then I'll just make a bunch of shapes. So this, I'll go back to my brushes, I'll get a brush like this one, the hard round. Actually, I'll go into my brush tips.
Can you please unlock it for us?
Unlock what? Oh, the assignment is locked? Okay, no problem.
The assignment.
The assignment. Assignment 1? Okay. Okay, assignment 1, we're going to talk about assignment 1 more next week. For assignment 1, we're going to have to like use perspective and everything like that. And I apologize, if I said assignment, we're doing an activity. So the activity is going to be due this Friday. So this is all I want you guys to worry about for the most part for now. I did unlock the assignment so you can see it. It's just going to be mindful of what's coming, but
The in-class activity is locked for us.
it's still locked? Are you sure? It says it's published.
The in-class activity is also locked.
Huh? Let's see.
Yeah, I just went to the discussion right now and I can't see it either.
Really?
It's like showing a lock.
Huh. I don't know how to unlock it. Okay. Try refreshing maybe? Maybe I have to refresh. This one's locked.
Everything we say is going to be delayed compared to the YouTube stream.
Yeah. Okay. Guys, I don't know how to unlock it. I'll look into it. I'll try to find that out. But no one can access it. Duplicate, unpin, send to, copy to. Oh, that's weird. Let me see. Weird. This is just I think this is Canvas acting weird. It does weird things sometimes. I'll get it sorted. I apologize, guys. In the meantime, what I'll do is I'll just make this template available to you otherwise. But that's really weird. I'm going to try getting out of this, and I'll try logging out and logging back in and see if that makes a difference.
Try replying to your own discussion with another picture of it. Maybe that'll.
Okay. Okay, I'll try that. Okay. Okay, can you check now to see if it works now? What in the world? Huh. It's not gonna work. It's guys, I've never encountered that before. I'm gonna have to research how to fix it. In the meantime, let me copy this image. I'll just paste it right into the Discord. Oops, let me not have that there. What's that?
On our end.
Oh, I can do a student view, so I can see what you guys see. I just don't know why it's doing that.
I've sent how it looks.
Okay. Yes, yeah, that's what it looks like for me when I go to student view. But here's the there it is in the Discord. So you guys can use that document there. You can pull that into Photoshop and work off of that. Yeah, I don't think I have permission to pin things. Or do I? Let's see. Might need a, yeah, I don't have permission. Okay, but I'll troubleshoot and figure out why that's happening. Get some IT support. I'll just make a note of that. Unlock discussion. I haven't had that problem in any of my other classes. I don't see even an option to lock things. But I was having some weird issues with one of my classes. I just can't remember which one it was, but it was a few days ago. Anyways, here we have shape. So here we can kind of start throwing down a whole bunch of different shapes. So variety is simply that, like a smorgasbord of like different things. We have round, kind of squiggly ideas. We have big shapes. We have little shapes. We have kind of more designy shapes. We have spiky shapes. We have, you know, kind of soft, more cuddly looking shapes. And it's whatever you want. So it's really kind of up to you how you kind of approach this. But yeah, that's effectively it. We can do whatever we want with color. You could just kind of deal with line here. It's still shapes, but if you wanted to get a clear read on the fact that this is lines, you know, then we could absolutely kind of go in and kind of be more deliberate about the fact that these are shapes. And I'm just kind of capturing each of the shapes all at once here.
I have a question. How will we submit the assignment since it's locked on and
I'll have to figure it out, or I'll just make a new discussion. Yeah, I'll figure something out. I can find out. I can go to student view. It gives me that option, and I should be able to just troubleshoot and test to see whether or not you guys can see it. But yeah, no, that's really bizarre. I'll figure that out, and I'll make an announcement once I do. Thanks for bringing that to my attention, guys. Okay, so that's what we could have. We could have something like that for this one. And just because, I'm gonna throw down a background color here to lean into that idea. Keep the colors mostly harmonious, but also have these unique kind of shapes everywhere. Okay, so that's variety of shape. Just have all kinds of different shapes going on. No real rhyme or reason. That's one approach you could take. And you could stack this. I could have a variety of shape and variety of color, right? And then make each of these shapes like a unique color as well. But let's keep it simple. Emphasis is basically, we saw one of those images in ArtStation. Did a really good job of having emphasis. So emphasis, basically what it is using other principles like a contrast or something else to make one area of your picture a clear target to look at. Okay, so emphasis could be you can take advantage of contrast or other elements of design to make emphasis work. All right, so we could have fairly harmonious looking colors here. Just dial down the opacity of these. All right, so I have fairly gray and dull looking and kind of rectangular type shapes. And then I could have like a very colorful splash of something different. But that's probably not enough. I think I need to do a little bit more. Go even maybe brighter or okay, so I'm kind of telling you to look at this, but I think I could even push it even further by darkening the area around this. And actually I'll use a gradient here. I'll use a gradient tool. I'll change my gradient style from basic in the basic section to the second one, which is foreground color, to transparent. Go OK. And I'll go from dark, and I'll use this radial gradient. I'll go from dark to light. So I'll just have concentrate my darkest values closest to this this form that I want to emphasize. Okay. And then in the end, I'm just kind of going on top and, oops, seeing if I can't further emphasize that in certain ways, or just integrate it better, but you know, keep that emphasis. Okay, and then that's kind of it. You'll just go through each of these principles, and make sure that you speak to each of your elements within these principles, and have fun with it. Have fun with it. Try to really grasp, understand, and be conscious of what you're doing. Don't worry about like saying, oh, this has to look like a character, or this has to look like that. more so focus on just conveying that particular element or principle of design. And let's go here for emphasis with color. Okay, and so that's basically it. Actually, let's do value for this one. Okay, and we're right at time, guys. We're basically right at time, but let's do value for this one, and let me just make this more white. So I'm going to go to image, adjustments, hue saturation, and just dial the saturation all the way down here. Pump up the brightness. Let's see. Like so. And I'm not a fan of this. I don't know, something about it I'm not liking. But you can kind of go in and I'm just gonna make this a little darker, make another thing on top, and save my brightest part for here. Okay, so there, emphasis, and I could continue to kind of go further and further and further emphasize this, going with like some darker shapes, and just add even a little bit more contrast in there. This could also be contrast, by the way, but you'll find that emphasis and contrast are kind of like similar, or generally you're going to use something like contrast to create emphasis. All right, so guys, we're going to wrap here. Hopefully that all makes sense. I know we covered a lot. We didn't really get to do the character stuff. We'll absolutely do more character stuff later this semester, so don't worry about that. But for now, hopefully this was informative to you guys, and further kind of gives you guys liberty or license to explore different ideas and kind of just experiment, have fun, and kind of see what you're able to come up with. I personally am really curious and keen to see kind of what you guys are able to kind of create. But yeah, any questions before we go? Oh, interesting. How did we do that? How did you get the sub thread, the sub channel? That's interesting. I'm learning new things about Discord. Anyways, so this is our this is the kind of thing. You're just going to go through each one, choose one of the elements of design, and use that element of design to articulate and demonstrate the principle. Make sure you use each element at least once, and please also indicate which element you are making use of. I'll sort out how to get how you guys can post on Canvas. Make sure it's not locked. But beyond that, thank you guys so much. I will wrap up this stream here, and then I'll jump over to Google Meet to see if anyone has any final questions. Okay.